Good morning. So, I thought today we'd explore some ideas through guided meditation and direction. Uh, the ideas I wanted to explore are movement, intention, and maybe if we get to it, karma. So, I want you to begin this session by finding a comfortable position. Maybe that position is seated, sitting in Caesar pose like I'm doing today, sitting on with legs crossed on a cushion with your seat higher than your knees, laying on your back on a comfortable mat on the floor, any of those possibilities. So uh, let's begin with a kind of exercise. More as an example than anything else, but uh, a helpful little exercise. So I want you to imagine, to visualize lifting your arm. And where does that start? It starts with intention. So an intention is sort of like throwing a pebble into a pond. That pebble results in ripples. So in the case of this this exercise, the pebble, the intention will be will result in bioelectrical waves in the brain. Those bioelectrical waves will through your uh, travel through ionic pathways or trails, reach the cells, the fiber cells of muscle tissue, causing them to push and pull, letting your arm slowly move up so your arm is extended and your palm is facing down. So let's do that exercise. You're not going to actually move your arm. You're just going to visualize your arm as it moves. So starting with that intention to move the arm, actually try and visualize the bioelectrical energy, the waves that are being produced in your brain. Maybe follow those waves as they travel down the ionic pathways to the muscle tissues, the muscle fibers, and actually experience the push and pull of the muscles. See if you can't feel the arm slowly making its way up to extend it out in front of you, palm down, and feel the muscles continuing to pull and push to maintain the arm as in its extended with the palm facing down. Holding it that way for a little bit, and then visualizing the muscles in the arm changing direction and beginning to pull and push, letting the arm slowly descend back down to your thigh. Try and do that a couple times, just following that sequence, the bioelectrical waves traveling along the ionic trail, stimulating or innervating the muscle fibers, the push and pull, the arm rising up. So then slowly letting the arm descend back slowly down. Now, what we've just described is motion, movement. Now, first of all, let's think about the idea of movement. movement, maybe as opposed to stillness. Is there any such thing really as stillness? Can something become still? If you hold yourself still, you hold your arms still, hold your body still, are you really still? Are you really now no longer moving? So I saw some film footage of a group of Zen monks in a zendo meditating, all sitting on their cushions. If you looked at that film footage in sort of real time, they looked like they were holding perfectly still. And the monk might actually report that he was sitting perfectly still. But if you change the speed, on the camera, and you got up high and looked down at the monks, you could actually see that they were wavering back and forth, moving in space. In a way, they looked a little bit like pond grass growing from the bottom of a pond with a current so that the grass wavered back and forth, very much like I'm doing right now. So even in stillness, there's actually movement. Actually, stillness as an idea is what you might call an artifact. In other words, it doesn't exist until we create it in our minds. We turn something out there, some sort of energy, the movement of the ripples in the pond turning into waves, that we attempt to take that movement and contain it by turning it into an object in our mind, an artifact, and then we call that artifact, which doesn't actually exist outside of our mind, stillness. We can't really be still. We're constantly in motion. Everything is moving. We're moving within everything, and everything is moving within us. So if you think of that movement of the arm as you extend it out, palm down, even as a visualization, that arm is moving through space, and that arm is moving space. The movement of space around the arm as the arm moves turns into waves of energy traveling across the space and causing objects in the space, maybe other yoga students or other meditators, to change slightly, maybe ever so slightly. Maybe it's just an incredibly minute change in their own motion. So if you looked at those Zen monks in the Zendo from the upper, position looking down on them, uh, and they're all wavering like pond grass, there seems to be some sort of synchronicity going on. They seem to be wavering in some very similar ways. Maybe that's because their movement changes the space around them, which minutely changes the other objects or Zen meditators in the environment, which causes a certain amount of commonality in the movement. There's always movement. We're in motion. Talking about being in motion or movement is another way of talking about being in a constant state of change. Nothing is holding still. Everything is moving and changing. Maybe the changes aren't really noticeable. Maybe at least you can't really notice them easily, but they are. So when that intention occurs in our mind, our brain, the intention, say, to move our arm, it's like a pebble being thrown into a pond that creates ripples. But those ripples also create waves of karma. In other words, those waves that result from the ripples of intention move throughout the space, move throughout the everything, and cause things to change as a result. And then, of course, we attempt to hold those movements still because that's the way our mind works. We try and take that motion, that energy, and we try and put something around it to contain it, to hold it still, to prevent it from passing through us and by and around. We take a hold of it. We grasp onto it. And in that grasping, that holding on, which emanates from desire, either the desire to take that energy, that object, and possess it, or to push that object or that energy away from us. But we take a hold of that energy. We take a hold of it and try and contain it. And when we try and contain it, there is this sort of automatic result, because what is trying? The I, me, mine, the self, the ego, is trying to contain or hold the energy. And we've already sort of established, I guess, if you really think about it, that energy is not containable. We're only creating an artifact, a facsimile of that energy, grasping onto it and holding it, which helps create our sense of who we are, what we are, where we are, makes us feel as if we're something substantial. That's the waves of karma. Now, this whole idea of visualizing this movement has some practical applications in everyday life. So let's suppose that you take any yoga pose that you know well, that you've spent some time working on and refining, and you decide, you have the intention to do that yoga pose, but only do it in your mind. So you go through you visualize each ripple, each movement of the yoga pose as you go through that. You don't actually move your body at all. You just see it happening inside of your mind. You visualize it. Now, frequently, sports, that's done in sports, athletics, where a, a person visualizes their practice, let's say throwing a ball, seeing themselves go through all the movements in their mind. Or people do it when they're trying to become efficient at some complex sequence. They'll go through all the steps of the sequence in their mind. And the research on that has shown that visualizing some sort of exercise, some sort of complex sequence, actually makes a person more effective or more efficient when they actually do that sequence in the real world. Let's experiment again. This time we're going to visualize belly breathing. We're not actually going to pay attention to our breath, not do anything actual in terms of breathing. We're going to start with the intent. We're going to throw that pebble into the pond to create the ripples. So visualize the first step in belly breathing is a kind of release in the abdominal area. Imagine the diaphragm moving up, opening a space. No, moving down, opening a space. Imagine that space being empty of breath, and then slowly filling from the belly. Feel the belly protruding out, and then feel the air gradually moving up, filling the tops of the lungs, expanding the sides and back. Maybe the shoulders rise. And then imagine that space that's now filled with air closing around the air, pushing the air back out through the nostrils. And finally, imagine the belly contracting in to empty that last little bit of air. And then starting again. Feeling the air enter in through the nostrils. Maybe there's a cool sensation. Feeling the abdomen as it protrudes out. Letting the diaphragm drop down and create space. Feel the air beginning to flow into that space. Feel the air moving up from the bottom of the lungs to the top of the lungs. Feel the sides expanding to increase the space, the back expanding. And then feel yourself release, relax, letting the air be pushed back out through the nostrils. Feel the abdominal muscles drawing in, pushing the last little bits of air through the nostrils. Now just let your breath be, breathing from the belly, opening the heart, releasing and letting go. All of that's about movement. Starting with the intention to move, creating ripples, bioelectrical waves in the brain. Those bioelectrical waves take the ionic trails to the muscles in the diaphragm and the muscles around the thoracic cavity. Those muscles contract and begin to create a space, a cavity. That space begins to fill with air, creating pressure. And so when you let go of those muscles and relax them, that causes the muscles to begin to let the space close, pushing the air out through the nostrils. Now this time as you breathe in, filling the belly, air rising up into your lungs, and you expand. Imagine that expansion starting from the sides and the back causes you to move the space around you, creating waves in that space. Those waves move through the space as energy, buffeting against the walls and floor and ceiling and the other meditators in your room, minutely changing them. There's only movement. So when you really think of the idea of stillness, it's a relative term. There is no absolute stillness. There is either less movement or more movement. So when you begin to think of yourself as static, occupying a space, occupying a location in space, holding still, remember that's an artifact created within the mind. There is no stillness, no absolute stillness. The idea of self is an attempt to take movement and contain it, force it into a box. But when we do that, imagine that. I mean, if you take something that really needs to move, it's sort of like one of those gyroscopic devices. When you try and hold that device still in your hand, you can feel the energy inside of the device. The energy is attempting to break free, to escape and return to its natural state of motion, movement. That's you. You're like that gyroscopic device. Your mind is trying to contain this energy, this motion, but it really can't be contained. Your mind tries to hold a thought still. The thoughts come and go and run their course. The natural state of things is movement, motion, change. We frequently find ourselves fighting against that, like we're holding on to that gyroscope of energy filled with motion, movement, energy. We want to hold on to it, but eventually we're forced to let go. We're constantly grasping and re-grasping and clinging, attempting to prevent that movement, that motion from happening. But that's the state. That's the natural state. Everything we know, every experience we have starts out as movement, sense energy, light waves, sound waves, olfactory waves, movement, motion. And then we take those waves and we try and contain them, creating the static self artifact, creating clinging, attachment, craving. And in meditation, beginning to let go. The natural state has lots of different names. You can name it whatever you like. Purusha, Buddha mind, God. But that natural state can't be contained. So thank you for joining me today for this guided, directed meditation. And I hope you found it to be of use for you today. Oh, stretching, bringing my hands to prayer. The practice of yoga is like a living organism. Its roots in the stony soil of the earth, its leaves in the infinite expanses of eternity. We are movement. Thank you for practicing yoga and meditation with me today. Namaste.